I do want to thank you, Sam, for joining us and for bringing kind of a story from real personal experience. And I wanted to first ask you just kind of tell us a little bit who you are and what brought you to spend this summer in the West Bank.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me, Esther. So I grew up in England and Holland, and mostly in Holland, and we went to roughly a conservative synagogue, liberal, somewhere in between reform and conservative. We had a conservative home, not that strict, I would say. You know, Seder, high holidays, go to shul on Shabbat sometimes. In college, I became more observant. But something that was important all along the way is that my home was very Zionist. My parents grew up in Germany before the war. My father was 16 when Hitler came to power, and his reaction was to work for the Zionist movement for 6 years. For various reasons, he didn't wind up going, but much of his family did. His sister went, his cousins went, and we used to visit regularly from Holland. It was quite easy. So we were very proudly and passionately pro-Israel. I loved Israel. But I've opposed the occupations as long as I can remember. After college, I went to yeshiva, to Bravendes, which many of you may know, which was still in Jerusalem. I would not have gone if it were on the West Bank. And as I recall, the first demonstration I ever attended of any kind was against the opening of a new settlement on Yom HaAtzmaut in 1982. And when I came back, I helped found the first Friends of Peace Now chapter at my university. We had little events, basically, and we were kind of small, but Friends of Peace Now seemed exciting, Friends of Peace Now seemed exciting. When Oslo came, I thought the conflict was over. Everything was going to be all set. That didn't happen. And in 2000, I helped restart a Friends of Peace Now chapter in Chicago. So that's basically where my politics have been. I've always felt I continue to be some sort of Zionist, I would say. But I always felt that as long as Israel maintains the occupation, we had no moral legitimacy and we were in danger of destroying the state pragmatically. In fact, the line we used to use in Peace Now, even in the 1980s, was there are 4 choices. Either you give all the Palestinians under Israeli rule the vote, and then you'll have a democratic state, but you won't have a Jewish state. Or you don't give any of them the vote, and then you'll have an apartheid state. Or you throw them all out, and at that time, in the 1980s, this was considered as Kanhana's line, and no one I knew was in favor of it. Now you find, unfortunately, large percentages of Israelis saying, yes, that would be fine. But certainly at one time that was just horrific, so we would say no. And the other alternative is a 2-state solution. So that's basically the only way to maintain a Jewish democratic state. So it's in fact, besides being the right thing to do, it's the Zionist thing to do. So since October 7th, I haven't known exactly what to do. And I can't stand the left-wing demonstrations in Chicago. I certainly can't stand the only pro-Israel, no criticism of Israel demonstrations. I don't like demonstrations in general. But I give money to organizations that bring Arabs and Jews together, especially things like Standing Together in Israel, the Palestinian Jewish organization that is working to change things, at least for Palestinian Israelis. And one of the organizations I support is Arik Asherman's Torah Tzedek, which does protective presence work, is out there in the West Bank, trying to help Palestinians and Bedouins whose communities are threatened by settlers. And he has come to our home several times outside Chicago in Evanston. And when he came last November, he said, look, I'm here to raise money. Of course he's here to raise money. But to be honest, we need more Jewish bodies on the ground. It was kind of a shocking statement, but it made sense. And for me and for several people in the audience, it was kind of almost a relief that there was something we could do besides just going to our computers and giving money. And giving money, it's good, it's needed, but I thought actually going out there and helping would be more important, more useful. So I asked Arik how long I should stay. He's busy, he doesn't always get back so quickly on email, but I decided a month would be about right. Couldn't see taking more time away from work and family. So I went in June. I spent basically 4 weeks trying to go out every weekday, mostly with Torah Tzedek, also with Rabbis for Human Rights a couple of times, to Masaf Yata, among other things, and once with Mr. Klim L'Kibush B'Inaim, looking the occupation in the eye. And that time we went out to Ras Ain and Muarajat, Muarajat being a small community of Bedouins that shortly thereafter closed down. And we were there to try to prevent that.
Thanks. Can you say a little bit more about what it means to do protective presence, what you do in the day-to-day, but also what is the theory of that work?
So for Torah Tzedek and Rabbis for Human Rights, the organizations that I was with, all the organizations I know who do this are committed to nonviolence. Actually, Mr. Klim, not entirely so. They sometimes, I was told at least, tried to start fights with settlers. I wasn't into that. The people I went out with were nonviolent activists too. So we start with the groundwork that these are nonviolent activists. We don't get into physical contact with the settlers or the army or the police. We did have a commitment that if Palestinians were physically attacked, we would try to intervene and stand between them. That it didn't happen to me while I was there. It did happen to Arik and a couple of other settlers, and they wound up getting beaten up quite badly. What we do primarily, the other thing I wanted to add is these are human rights organizations. They're not organizations with a view about what the solution to the conflict is. Many people have solutions, various solutions. And in fact, one interesting thing that I think we'll get to a little bit briefly is that the activists differ quite a bit about what kinds of solutions they support. But meanwhile, we're there to help Palestinians in the presence of settler attacks. Mostly what we do is film. So settlers, when I was there, a typical day was early in the morning, a settler would come with his flocks, usually a flock, a young teenager, often not entirely emotionally sound. I mean, these people are recruited often from broken homes and poor environments to do this kind of thing. And, partly because when they're young, they can't be tried on the same level of charges, partly because they're looking for a kind of cult, and this is a kind of cult, so the outpost certainly. And they will feed their flocks on Bedouin or Palestinian land, or send them into a shed where the Bedouin have stored fodder and have them eat away the fodder, or have them eat the grapevines, lie down in the middle of the village and play their music while their flocks are doing this. We would film them, call the army, call the police. Other kinds of things also happen. Sometimes once a settler came into a village in Masafayata, got out of his jeep and just stood there with his gun in the middle of a crowd of people, including toddlers, just standing there to be a kind of threatening presence. We call the police, we call the army, they rarely come. Sometimes the army came just as the settlers were leaving, quite often, suspiciously often. The police, at least on 2 occasions that they did come, harassed us rather than the settlers. And then in between we wait and we just sit during the heat of the day. There wasn't that much to do. My son-in-law is Israeli, and he and I shared experiences. We both agreed that the hardest part is often sitting and waiting. It's very boring. But and actually confronting the settlers is scary, but at least it's interesting.
Is there any kind of particular anecdote or story that you feel you could share? And also, I imagine that the characters you meet on these kind of excursions are interesting. Is there anything like that you could share?
So I'll share a couple of stories. One I just alluded to. This was out in Masafayata, actually, and but a different time. When the activists I was with, there were just two of us. There are very few activists out there at the moment, and in fact, that's part of a problem. Arik Asherman, who runs Torah Tzedek, he is trying to protect a village of Bedouin who were expelled from a place called Wadi al-Sik, and they have been told by the court they can return in September. And it's very rare that they're able to return. But the court hasn't granted them any protection. In fact, one reason we film is to give evidence to the courts that these people need protection, and that includes filming the army not coming or leaving, the police coming and not coming or leaving, phone calls to the police in which they blow people off, and the people in Wadi al-Sik, I'll get to the story in a second, say they will return only if there's a minimum of 30 activists who will come and stand with them. And so far, Arik has raised, I think he wants 15 Israelis and 15 from abroad. He's got just 8 from abroad. So if anybody is ready to go in September, I have a place for you. So I was out with this one other person to help a shepherd who lived pretty much alone with his wife in a house. We couldn't see any other house for, I don't know, about miles around, but we couldn't see any from his house. And he's elderly, he and his wife are elderly and poor. And he was afraid to go out with his flock because settlers regularly come, and he's afraid both that they'll come and feed their flocks on his land, but also that they would scare his wife or enter his home and take things, which happens at times. But we went out with him, leaving his wife alone in the house. And in fact, a settler came, circled the house. It's just a threat, right? He didn't, but the woman was screaming and crying. And we rushed back to the house, filmed the settler. He then went out and grazed his flocks on the land. And we called the police, and the police came and actually listened, the first set of police, and went down to talk to the settler. But they got the impression that he was about to leave, so they left, and he didn't leave. So we called the police again, and the second time, and I'm sorry to say that the first time it was secular policemen, and the second time it was policemen wearing kippot. And the ones wearing kippot, they didn't even look at the settler. They just harassed us. Where's your ID? What are you doing here? Who gives you a business to? And then when they were done with that, they said, Yalla, we're going. They would have taken 5 steps to see the settler at that point with his flocks in this guy's little olive grove, eating away, and they didn't bother. So for me, that was enlightening. It was awful, but it was enlightening because I didn't actually, I believe enough in law and order and trust police and armies and soldiers enough in general, maybe I shouldn't, that I didn't really believe that they are in league with these people and that they aren't going to do anything. But there I saw it, which was tough to see. The other thing I wanted to say, it's not exactly a story, though there's one incident that illustrates it particularly well. You had as a question, and I know you didn't ask this one, but, and you didn't ask it, I think, because it's hard, namely, when did I feel I made a difference? And I was thinking about this afternoon, and I don't think there's a single occasion in the 4 weeks in which we prevented a settler from doing anything or got the police or army to arrest them. We didn't actually, maybe they were less violent than they would have been. We do think that the worst violence happens when often, though Audo Hathelin, who was connected to this film, was killed when there were activists present. But in general, and certainly when I was there, the worst violence happens when there are no activists present. So maybe we're making a difference and we don't know in that sense. But the one difference that I know that we do make is that the Palestinians who are there feel some comfort about the fact that we're there. I was surprised by how much they thanked us. I really sort of expected kind of something like what Basil says in the film. So you come for 5 minutes and leave, right? Okay, you're here for a month, great, I have to live with this. But in fact, there was what seemed to me really honest, sincere thanks. They constantly bought us things, sodas, ice cream, cakes. And you're called out in the middle of the night because a settler is threatening to cut the water main. He goes away and we stood there, and these Palestinians bring you cakes. It's very heartwarming. Arik has said, when he's come to our house repeatedly, that he wears a kippah all the time. He's a Reform rabbi, but he's pretty observant. And he's strict about wearing his kippah. He said that Palestinians have told him he's the first Jew with a kippah they've ever seen who didn't have a gun with which to threaten them. And for me, going out with my kippah was important in precisely that way. Sometimes we got questions. One of the activists I was with was asked, is he a settler? Because I had a kippah. But I think being there does, and showing that, some of us do stand with them, that does have some importance.